In this video, we're going to look at fader banks on the Stadium Series consoles. And again, it's exactly the same on the 500M, 250M or the Stadium Connect. Let's jump over to our playbacks here, and you've got your regular page up down buttons. We enabled earlier page holdover and set up view settings playback. 2-page holdover or page holdover mode is set to 2-page holdover already. So that means when I activate some playbacks on one page, like so, I can change to the next page, activate the playbacks below at a level, let's push them up to say full, go back to the previous page, and my faders will jump between the levels. Now what we've introduced on the Stadium series is this concept of banks. What banks allow me to do is, as well as the traditional moving up and down through pages, is they allow me to bank along playbacks. Now if you imagine I was on the MQ 500M console, which has 15 motorized faders, 15 encoder playbacks, we also have a product called our MQ 500M Stadium Wing, which again adds another 15 motorized fader playbacks and encoder playbacks for the 500M console. But if I had that wing sitting next to my 500M, what I can do with banks is essentially I can move a wing's worth of playbacks over onto my main playbacks. Now, although on the MQ 250M, you cannot connect the MQ 500M wing to it, you still have this concept of banks, and on the Connect as well. If you press and hold your next and previous page buttons, you'll see now on my screen, when I'm in playbacks mode, below, you've got 8 banks listed below. Each bank contains 20 playbacks, and they're essentially, bank 1 is your main, but think of it a little bit like wings. Instead of moving vertically up and down through your playbacks, with banks, you can bank horizontally along. So I can move the whole surface, instead of being playbacks 1 to 20, as I'm on an MQ 250 console, I could bump it up and have the next lot of 20 playbacks on my faders. So in a real world environment, how might you use this? Well, let's say I'm on page 1. I go to page 1 and maybe it's related to a particular song or an act or part of my show, and I've got everything I want on page 1 for that part of the show. The next song, next act of my show, I've got on page 2. It allows me to stay on the same page and have all related items on that particular page. So maybe I've got a main queue stack and maybe some stacks to get triggered via macros or something alongside that main stack. And then I've got some specials. Maybe it's going to be things like blinders. Well, I can store those on the bank related to the page. So I've now banked up playback 11 onwards on these faders here. And I've put things like my strobes, my strikes, as you can see in the visualizer, on these flash buttons here, on these playbacks here below. So I've given myself access to the things that I want related to the song or the act I'm currently on via this concept of banks moving across. It allows me to have even more playbacks active and under my control at any one time on the console. Now if you've changed between banks, you can store again the fader state to an execute button. So if I open up my execute window on the console, you can see here's some executes I stored earlier. If I change to say bank 1, move my cursor to an empty box in the execute window, assign special and select fader function, will store what my faders are currently doing to that button. If I change bank, let's go this time to bank number 2, move my cursor to an empty box, assign special, hit fader function again. Now it gives me buttons to step through the different banks on my faders, and they could be of course on different pages as well. So we've looked at now fader modes and fader banks. We're going to go on in our next video and have a look at encoders and the encoder modes on the Stadium series consoles.